Hello viewer, review of related literature forms an integral part of any research and it serves many important purposes for the researcher. In this video program, I'll try to answer two basic questions. What is review of related literature and why is it essential to carry out review of related literature? Rand's Corporation, a research organization, has set standards of high quality research, and among the criteria which has been enlisted, one of the criteria is the study should demonstrate understanding of related studies. The criteria has been elaborated and it has been said that the study should demonstrate understanding of related studies because it necessarily builds on and contributes to a body of research and analysis. The relationship between the existing study and its predecessors should be rich and explicit. And another standard which is laid down is that understanding of past research should be evident in many aspects of work, from the way in which the problem is formulated, approach to the discussion of the findings and their implication. And lastly, the criteria states that care should be taken to explain the ways in which study agrees, disagrees, or otherwise differs importantly from previous studies. In this light, when we say review of related literature, it's a very systematic process. It passes through a number of stages, and maybe you start with identifying the key words, identifying the sources of information, reading the sources of information and analyze the information and then synthesize the information. So in other words, you can say that it involves identifying, evaluation and synthesis of the work related to the topic or area of research already produced by the practitioners, academicians and researchers. So three important parameters you can see: identification. So one has to identify the sources from where the information can be searched. And these would include all your primary sources of information, secondary sources of information, and preliminary sources of information. The studies which you collect from all these sources needs to be evaluated against certain criteria that they should be credible and should be important as far as your research work is concerned. Synthesis involves that you need to collate the information which you gather from various sources with respect to the different studies. And it serves large number of purposes for researcher. One of them is selecting and defining the problem. Now, when a researcher starts identifying the problem for research, he goes through the various sources to find out whether the area which he or she has selected has the potential to take further research or whether there are gaps which can be filled in. So even when you are thinking of taking up a problem statement for your research work, you need to carry out review of related literature to find out which is the area which has potential for further research and where are the gaps that exist, and it also helps in defining the problem, crystallizing the variables of the problem, and it helps the researcher to state the objectives of the research or state the research questions. Another purpose served by review of related literature is it provides you background for the building up rationale for the study. So you can dwell on the rationale and highlight the importance or significance of taking up the research study. Another purpose served is that on the basis of the review of related literature, the researcher can formulate hypotheses. When I say formulate hypothesis, it means that you will have educated guess regarding the solution to the problem. So, when you undertake review of related literature, if the findings of the various studies are conclusive, it is very important that you, keeping in consideration the findings of the study, formulate the hypothesis. If all the findings are conclusive as say there is positive significant correlation between intelligence and achievement of the student, it clearly indicates that once you are formulating a hypothesis, you are not going by the null hypothesis, but you will try to form a directional hypothesis. If the findings are inconclusive, maybe you can start with null hypothesis. In addition to that, selecting an appropriate design for the research. So, the study which you are aiming to undertake, maybe there are possibilities that you can take up survey research, or you can carry out a similar study taking a case in that particular area where you have an example of excellent institution and a poor institution. So, whether a case study research design would be more appropriate or a survey research would be more appropriate, this decision can also be taken on the basis of the previous research which has been carried out. Or maybe you are thinking of taking up a correlational study. So, if correlational study, normally survey research and correlation, there is little difference as far as the objectives are concerned. The objectives are different, that you would like to determine the relationship between two or more than two variables. But the data needs to be collected at the same point of time or at different point of time would say whether the correlational study is similar to the survey or it is going to be predictive study where one variable data is collected at one point of time and another variable either at a different point of time. So, design for research can be crystallized on the basis of the review of related literature. The tools to measure the various variables included in the study can also be finalized because the research studies which have already been undertaken point to you that there are number of tools which can be used to measure either intelligence or emotional intelligence or the learning style. So once you are carrying out review of related literature, maybe you can crystallize which is the tool which has been most commonly used, which is more reliable, valid, and would serve your purpose. And it also gives you an idea whether only questionnaire study would be appropriate or along with you need to validate the data by having certain interviews and observations of the phenomena. In addition to that, review of related literature helps you in selecting appropriate techniques for selecting sample for the study and techniques for analyzing the data. When I say selecting sample, so whether most of the research has been carried out at the school level or has it been carried out at the university level or college level, and when you talk about what are the differences that exist and am I going to select a systematic sample or simple random sample or stratified random sample, so where am I focusing? So your research questions will be guiding you in selecting or finalizing the techniques of sampling, but the review of related literature provides you that whether studies which have already been taken up, what kind of sampling they have used and what kind of findings are there. Select techniques for analyzing data is another purpose served by review of related literature. So once you gather the data and you have already stated your objectives and formulated the hypothesis, what are the different statistical techniques that can be used and how your hypothesis get accepted or rejected, that will determine what kind of statistical techniques will be used, and previous studies certainly help in providing you an insight into that if you have gathered data, then what kind of various statistical techniques can be applied to come out with the findings of your research study. In addition to that, interpretation of the findings is an important purpose which is served by the review of related literature, and you can also justify the findings on the basis of previous studies. Now, for example, whatever are the findings of your study, you need to either support those findings by the findings of previous studies, or you can always say whether the findings of the study are in tune with the findings of the earlier studies, or are there differences in the findings which you have obtained in your study. And the explanation which is available in the previous studies will help you in justifying the findings of your study. So there has to be the support from the literature which you have reviewed for your study. So in nutshell, one can say that review of related literature serves important purposes for the researcher and is utilized at different stages of the research process. And in nutshell, one can say that review of related literature will help the researcher to answer the following question: whether the problem has been researched earlier or not, and if not, then there is a scope for taking up further study. And it also helps the researcher to answer a question: what variables have been studied? Maybe there are few variables which theoretical propositions put forth, but research has not been carried out. Maybe that provides an idea to include those variables which have not been studied by the researchers in the past. Or maybe when you are taking up experimental study, then the previous research helps you in finding an answer to what will be the independent variable and what will be the dependent variable of your study and what controls need to be exercised. So what is the cause and what is the effect? You will be able to discern this by looking at the previous research which has been carried out. In addition to that, your research questions which you formulate or state for the study, you will get an idea from the review whether those research questions have been answered by the past studies, and if you have conclusive findings, is there need to go for answering the same questions, or can you improvise or modify your questions to find and contribute to the existing body of knowledge? What design has been used in the similar study? This question will help you in selecting the appropriate design for your research, and it will also help you to answer the question in what context and on what sample the studies have been conducted. So you can select a similar context if similar studies have not been conducted in the context to which you belong. Maybe we have a large set of literature available for the general education, but when it comes to vocational education and technical education, maybe those kinds of studies are not available. Or, in other words, you can say that the sample for the study, which has been the 10 plus 2 students studying in medical or non medical stream, or the students who have opted for commerce. Maybe these are the distinctions which are available, and you can see whether a study has been sample has to be selected from the general education, or you would like to extend the findings to the vocational students or the students studying in technical education system. You can answer the question, what tools have been used for various variables. So you have variety and you can zero down which particular tool has been used by majority of the studies and which is more reliable and valid, and which tool would serve the purpose of answering the research questions stated for this study. Then the findings of the previous studies, you will come to know whether those findings have been conclusive or contradictory. And these will help you. If the findings have been contradictory, there may be a need to take up the study in that same field, and you can repeat the study and come out with the findings, and then you can interpret the findings of your study with the help of the review of related literature which you have carried out. You are able to answer, do findings of the studies contradict or support your findings? And lastly, review of related literature will help you in justifying the findings of your study. So, how can I justify the findings of my study is another question to which you can find an answer to by taking up review of related literature. Thank you. हो गया चलो